Hello, Wolfmined here, and welcome to a little bit of a different video mini-series. This is actually something I've been wanting to do for quite a while, and as you guys know, I build cruise ship replicas in a game called Minecraft. Well, there is a reason for that, and of course being that I have been on actual cruises, and that's what this video is going to focus on, more specifically one, and then another video will follow about my other cruise. Because I've only been on two cruises, which is kind of weird because, I build all these big ships and things, but I've only been on two actual cruises. So, in this video, you're going to be looking at mostly just gameplay, and then I'll occasionally throw in pictures of things when I'm talking about certain things. Because I'm kind of going over what I did in each cruise, kind of like giving like a review, I guess you could say. But also like giving some of my little misadventures and funny things that happened along the way. So go ahead and enjoy watching whatever it is playing in the background. It could be War Thunder, it could be some other weird-ass game. But this video is going to focus on my cruise aboard the Carnival Victory. So before I begin with the actual cruise itself, I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory. So when I first learned about this, that I was going to be going on a cruise, I kind of like gotten like all crazy because I haven't been on a cruise before and I really wanted to go. So I was actually playing Minecraft at this time, and this was back in 2011, and I was playing the game, and I decided that, hey, since I'm going on this ship, maybe I could just, build a ship in this game for the hell of it. So that's kind of where the whole shipbuilding thing began. I was just using a bunch of mods, because this was back before creative mode, and was just putting together a few ships, and the main result of that you can still see on my Planet Minecraft page, which is Pride of the Seas, I think it's called. That was my first, like, actual cruise ship that I finished. It's not the first ship I made, but the first, like, decent one. Even though, in today's standards, that thing is absolutely horrible. After I made that ship, I went on to make a bigger ship when I became admin on the Lunaware server. If you never seen some of the few times I've mentioned that server. But I was an admin on there. This was way back before OIO was ever a thing. So I got to building a bigger, better cruise ship on there, which still kind of looked like the Pride of the Seas ship I built earlier, but just on a larger scale. And it looked horrible, I'll be honest with you. So that was done right before I left to go on my cruise, and then the actual cruise happened. For those of you who don't know what the Carnival Victory is, it is a Triumph-class cruise ship with the Carnival Cruise Lines company, and it's a decent-sized ship, about your average cruise ship size, I guess you could say. But it's kind of a cool ship. I built it, obviously, if you haven't seen it. I mean, that was like it was also one of the early cruise ships I built, and it's not really that good at all. I mean, I'd really like to go back and actually make a decent replica of it. But the actual cruise itself starts off in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And then it's a 7-day cruise that goes on to St. Tomas, and then Barbados after a day at sea, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and ending off in St. Martin before heading back to the home port. So the actual cruise itself has some pretty good destinations. So let's start off in St. Tomas and what I did there. So we arrived early in the morning, as usual, into each port, and we decided that it was me and my parents on this cruise. And we decided to go on a snorkel trip to a little island that's off the coast of the mainland island of the U.S. Virgin Islands. I can't remember what the exact... I don't think the actual island's named St. Tomas. I think it's just the town. But, anyway. So we went on a little snorkel cruise, got on a little catamaran sailboat, and it turns out there was this shipwreck out there. And it was in about, I have to say, 80, 60 feet of water or so, somewhere around that area. And it turns out that the story of that ship that's down there is actually, it was a cargo ship that actually, I think somehow pirates got on there, or the crew was unknowingly transferring illegal goods. So the U.S. Coast Guard, or the Coast Guard, I'm not sure if it was U.S., but one of the Coast Guards went after them and set fire to the ship to get like to capture all the crew. So I guess the crew was in on it. I don't remember the exact details because this was back in January of 2012. the ship ends up sinking because of the fire, not too far from when this little island was. And over time, a few hurricanes came by, and this is the story, and this is the exact, like, kind of how it was said to us on the ship, is that the currents from these hurricanes and the waves actually pushed the ship up, almost all the way up on. Actually, I think it actually did. It just pushed it all the way up because it's mostly a sandy bottom in that area, so the currents pushed it up almost right on shore with all the waves helping it. So maybe the ship wasn't like entirely sunk. Maybe it was just like floating there, kind of like half submerged. So it ends up getting on shore, and then another hurricane comes along and takes it back out to sea, but not all the way out. So it's still within snorkel depth, so you could see it from the surface of the water. So that was pretty cool. It's all broken up into pieces. That was the first time I've ever seen any kind of a shipwreck before, and that was pretty cool. And kind of like I've done lots of snorkeling before, but that was pretty eerie. Like usually when I see big like things that are not supposed to be underwater normally, it kind of like creeps me out. But that's just me. After that day in St. Thomas, it was a whole day at sea, which means that you are on the ship all day and you have to figure out what to do with yourself. And I mostly just played on the water slide and went around, had lunch, and did all kinds of things on the ship. And at the time, I was taking pictures of everything since I was planning on building the ship, and I wanted to have, photographs of certain things that I would not normally find on the internet. So I'm going to take this time to talk about some of the fun things that I did on the ship itself. So, since I was taking pictures of everything around, I decided, like, hey, let me go down to deck 0, which is where the crew is, might I tell you, and take some pictures of, like, the elevator area and kind of, like, the general idea of what it looked like down there, because I wasn't planning on doing, like, the full crew area, but at least wanted to have it, like, set up. Kind of like how I've been doing on all the ships. I haven't really taken the time to make crew areas. So I decided, like, hey, okay, I'm gonna go down, take my camera. I start looking around, take a few pictures, and this guy comes out of nowhere. He's some crew guy. He's like, hey, what are you doing down here? I'm like, oh, I was just taking pictures. He's like, oh, yeah, you're not supposed to be down here. I'm like, oh, okay. So I just head back up. I'm like, all right. Well, there's my first time of getting busted on the ship. So obviously I didn't know that going down to deck 0 was a big no-no. So after that rather funny experience, I went on to, this wasn't all, like, all this what didn't happen on the day at sea. This was all just spread out across the whole trip. So if you don't know, and if you haven't been on a cruise, usually it's pretty windy on the top deck area because the ship is moving, and there's also the sea winds, or trade winds, I guess you can call them. And my dad and I decided to go up to the mini golf course. And if you don't know where the mini golf course is on the ship, it's right in front of where the smokestack is, which is pretty much as high as you can get on the ship. Because the front of the ship kind of like does like a hunchback at the front, but where the mini golf course is, it's almost at the same level. So you're exposed to the full winds, I guess you could say, at that level. So we decided to play mini golf in winds that probably would say were over 20 miles an hour constantly. And so we put the ball down on like the little starting area, and the ball does not stay because of the wind, it goes flying off. So that was pretty interesting, having to play mini golf and having to work your way around the obstacles while also having to take into fact the wind, which would push the ball around as you putt it. So that was pretty fun, kind of a challenge. There's not much else that was kind of funny and outstanding afterwards, but most of the time I'd have to say that this ship is a pretty nice ship. It's a little more. It's not like all brand new and fancy at the time I went on it. It was recently refurbished, but it's not like to the standard as it is today, where there's electronics everywhere. But I'd still have to say that it was a pretty nice ship, and of course I did end up building it. But that ship does deserve to have a better remake by me, but I don't think I'll ever get around to that. So after the day at sea, we arrive in Barbados, which was a bit of a lazy day. We didn't do any of the activity stuff, because if you haven't been on a cruise, there's activities you can set up to do at each port that you do with your you can do it from your room, or you can go to the guest services and do it from there. So we decided to just take the day off and just go to the beach. So not much happened in Barbados, but I have to say the beaches in there are pretty cool. So not much happened on that day, so let's move on to the next day where we arrived in St. Lucia. So the activity we decided to do here was ziplining, something I haven't done myself, and I'm a person who's afraid of heights, so I was a bit skeptical, but at the same time I've always wanted to try it, so I thought, why the hell not? I'll do it. So we head out, and we leave the town. I can't remember the town's name, but I have to say that the roads there in America, we have huge roads, pretty big roads. Because here the roads were just small, because we were going down the main highway, which was, I think, 3 lanes on each side, and it was just so compact. Like when you were in the fast lane, you were right against the wall of the and on the other side is the rest of the traffic. And so that was pretty interesting how like there's barely any room. And I mean most of the world is like this, but that was the first time I ever seen it myself, and that was pretty crazy. So after a long trip going through the various like mountains, it's kind of like a little mountainy area that we went through to get to the place where the zip line is out in the middle of a jungle. So we start off our tour guide guy is a guy who's probably in his 20s, and he's basically just crazy on the zip line. He's like jumping all around, going all over the place, while the normal tourist is just going along the line, not doing much, just enjoying the view. So there was all kinds of things a part of this. I can't remember how many zip lines total there were, like actual runs. But there was also a part where you had to do a free fall, which was pretty interesting because you're in a harness attached to this certain kind of, I can't remember, I don't know the exact name of the piece of metal that it is, but it holds the rope in just a way. It's like a rappel. I guess yeah, it's the same setup as rappelling, but this one is where you just free fall, and as you reach the bottom after a 30-foot drop, the rope does like a curve, and as you reach the bottom, that curve becomes more and more of a steeper angle, and the friction of that stops you before hitting the ground. So that was pretty interesting, having to just like, oh, I'm gonna go free falling down this rope and hope it holds me. So that had to be one of the fun moments of that. And afterwards, we headed right back to the ship. The next day came around, and we arrived in the island of St. Kitts, which is a little bit more of a ways north, and pretty close to St. Martin, which was the next destination after this. So for this island trip, we did an off-road adventure where we went through various mountainy areas of the island itself. Did some like it was all off-road, of course, so lots of bumping around and stuff, and we had like a lunch up at some little like I wasn't sure it was like a hotel, just kind of like a general area that you could do hangouts at. Eventually, it ended on the other side of the island, where I can't remember the exact details, but I think we stopped at one of the beaches or something to look around, and then going right back to the ship. So that was a kind of a little more low key, not as low key as Barbados, but it was low key compared to all the other ones. And finally, the last destination was St. Martin. And if you haven't been to St. Martin, you would know that they have an airport that everyone likes to go to, the Princess Juliana Airport. And the reason everyone wants to go to this airport, and now I'm actually going to transition over to some footage I have had on my previous YouTube channel that I haven't put on this channel, is because this channel didn't exist around then. So I put up these videos, and you should be watching them right now, and this is basically what the beach is like. You got airplanes landing right over the top of your head on this beach. So since my family is mostly airplane fans, we decided to, hey, instead of doing some weird trip, we'll just take a taxi to this airport and sit at the beach all day and watch all the flights come in. And I have to say that was pretty fun, being an airplane head, I guess you could say, or crazy guy, or person who loves airplanes. This was pretty fun. So it started off with mostly just small planes and your average jetliners, and then there was a time where MD-80, I think it is an MD-80. Took off, and I got to go stand right behind it as it took off, and you don't really take into account how strong the jet blast is. Because standing behind there, you thought, like, okay, it's an MD-80. It's not going to do too much because it's a little plane. Boy, was I wrong. My hat goes flying off. I think I'll show the clip of that as well. My hat goes flying off into the water, and some kid goes and gets it for me. And I got like sand pelting my face. I was like, holy cow! I now have a new appreciation for how strong jet engines are. So if you ever get a chance to go to St. Martin, I would highly recommend going there if you're anyway interested in airplanes. And finally, towards the end, as you know, that there are some big planes that come into that airport, specifically 747s and whatnot. Unfortunately, on this day, there wasn't any 747 flights, but there was a A340 that landed right before we had to leave to get back on the ship in time. So that was crazy seeing a plane that huge right above you. There was one time where an Airbus was coming in, I think it was an A320 or something, came in. It was real close, like it felt like you could touch it almost. So yeah, it's really just a crazy experience, one that you really have to experience yourself before you really get like a full respect for it. Because not many airports in the world are like that, where you can just be right there, right where the runway ends, and just watch planes come right over your head. And that was definitely a fitting end to this cruise. And so the final morning arrives, where we arrive in port and we have to disembark the ship. And leaving the ship, you know how most people get after a fun like trip. They don't want to leave, you know. But after this, it was kind of weird. Like I felt satisfied. I didn't like really want to stay because I did everything that was I wanted to do on the ship and both in the destinations. And I wasn't really going to miss leaving it. So it's kind of weird. Not much. That was like the first time it's ever happened where I went on a trip and I was actually, ready to leave when the time came. But that was the end of my first cruise trip, and afterwards I came back home to start putting together an actual replica of the Carnival Victory. Because at this time, Arrowin and Sea Star, which were the two ships before this, were not built yet or in planning. But as I started to try and make the Victory, I came across a problem and decided, hey, I should probably build some other cruise ships to get some experience before I go into building this thing, because I wanted the Carnival Victory to actually look good and actually look like a replica, which at the time it was a pretty good looking ship. But today, with how far I've come in building ships, it definitely is horrible. So I ended up building the Arrowin and the Sea Star just as little testing. That's why the Arrowin and more specifically the Sea Star, that's why they kind of look like the Victory, because I was using certain parts of that ship on these custom ships just to see how I could do it and how I would do it on the full thing. It was a test, I mean, obviously. So, that's my experience and kind of a little backstory of how I got into building ships in Minecraft. Because it all started with learning that I was going to go on a cruise and thinking, hey, I can build ships on this game just to, help fuel my excitement. And that's how it all began, and rest is history. But that is not my one and only cruise. I have another cruise aboard the Liberty of the Seas that happened a year later, and I'm going to be covering this in a next video. So that's the end of this video. Next up will be the Liberty of the Seas, as I just said. And that's pretty much all I have to say. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. My name is Chris, also known as Wolfmined, and I'll see you in whatever the next video is going to be.